Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz McGinn, and I'm the host for our panel discussions today. So today we'll be talking about scaling success, the cultural shift for predictive maintenance, and digital transformation. I'm joined by three panelists today: Nick, who you heard speak earlier, Natalie, who you heard mentioned during the Blue Scope, and then Todd, who's recently joined us at Senseye. So could you please introduce yourselves before you get started? Nick, could you start, please?
Hi, Liz. I think everybody heard the introduction earlier on, actually. So for those who missed it, I've spent 30 years at the intersection of business and technology, helping companies improve their operating performance through those tools.
Awesome. Thank you. Natalie?
Hi, everyone. I've been working with Senseye for the last, 4.5 years now, and the delivery of the tool. So I worked with Blue Scope and other customers to get them onboarded and trained up and make sure that Senseye is doing what they want it to do.
Awesome. And Todd?
Thanks, Liz. Listen, I'm Todd Martin, and I am the Siemens Senseye Managed Services Lead, and I recently joined the Siemens team after retiring from Nissan, where I used Senseye for 7 years. Was involved in the proof of concept that brought the system on board there, and implemented, designed many of the data collection systems to provide the data to the Senseye system.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's jump in. Before we can talk about what needs to shift in a maintenance team or a company's culture to implement predictive maintenance or any new technology, we should first kind of figure out what's currently happening within the maintenance team. So Todd, as you've worked in maintenance before, what's currently happening that you saw during your experience?
So especially in a large facility, your maintenance teams are broken up into a lot of different departments or groups that, focus on certain areas on there. So and a lot of times they may have their own individual ways of doing things. So that's something that you have to consider. Each of those groups probably have different KPIs based on the processes that are going on in those areas. Also their training may be different, just because it's different equipment. So there's a lot of different experience, backgrounds, and skill sets that are going on in those different groups.
Yeah, the training is interesting. It's kind of a callback to Blue Scope talking about their training. Natalie, do you want to kind of speak to that? Were you involved in their training aspect of it?
Yeah, Blue Scope was a really interesting one. So for training them, I worked hands-on with them and just getting them in using the app and figuring out how to monitor their equipment. So we had lots of one-on-one sessions with myself and Chris Watson to figure out how these machines work. They did not have traditional condition indicators. They did not have vibration monitoring on their rotating equipment for the most part. So we had to get really creative. And throughout that process of figuring out what to bring into Senseye and how to configure it, they really learned a lot about how the app works.
Nice. Awesome. And they mentioned also during that time that they talked about this role of figuring out who can be champions and the importance of having that.
Yeah, so Blue Scope, they really did a lot of things right. And I think one of the biggest things that they did that led to their success is that they had drive from the bottom up. The end users in all the different areas, their sites are massive, and they wanted to use it. But they also had support from the top bottom to incentivize and engage their end users into using Senseye and to really integrate it into their system. So I think that was a really key part of why they were successful. And actually, when I went on site to do some introductions and to do some training, we had one session planned in which people from the site could come in and sit in and learn about Senseye and figure out how they can get started. And there were so many people that showed up that we needed to make a second one so that everybody could join. So I think the key in finding the right champion is whoever is sponsoring the project needs to sell Senseye internally so that people can see the benefits of it. People should want this because it will make them more efficient in the long run.
Yeah, Nick, you mentioned something similar during your presentation as kind of what does this mean to me versus just what does it mean to the company?
Absolutely. And as Natalie was saying a second ago, those champions, sometimes I describe them to companies I work with as Yodas. Yeah, it's who are the Yodas in the production facility? That these are typically the people that have been there for 30 years, that when something goes wrong, they know how to fix it. It's not necessarily written down somewhere. They're just the wise people. If you can win those people over, that's so infectious in terms of getting everybody on board. And I think the other thing that I think is linked to the training is I've seen a lot pilots and projects deliver the training to the end user, and that's great. But if they don't keep using the tool, they forget how to use it. They forget about the benefits, and it becomes another one of those implementations that's gathering dust on the shelf. So I think in addition to just that training motion, it's keep that continuous engagement. So I talked about some of that feedback loops. Yeah, what's working, equally what's important, what's not working, and keep that improvement, making things better all the time.
That's awesome. I mean, you mentioned, I guess, this whole feedback in the training loops and the training, and also this champion. I know Todd has some experience kind of, pushing the Senseye kind of predictive maintenance digitalization journey forward. Do you want to speak to a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, definitely, you've got to have champions. One of the key things you want your champions, you want to pick them from a pool of people that are excited about the technology or technology in general. You're going to have different age groups within the maintenance departments. You're going to have your newer techs, then you're going to have your older techs. You'll get your most resistance from the older techs because they're old school. So a lot of times it helps you grab those younger guys who have grown up with the technology, and that's really where they're focused at on this new cool, software application, and are hungry to make a name for themselves, in their group, to stand out. So it's kind of important that those are really good resource, ones to have as a champion. So. And the other thing is not to have too many of them. You really want to have potentially one oversight on here to make sure that it's being utilized, properly. As I saw in the past, some areas are going to have more benefit from Senseye than other ones. It's just the nature of the type of pieces of equipment. Some wear out slower than others and have problems. Some are faster. The faster ones you see more benefit from. And, so it's keeping them engaged and across the board.
I think, Todd, just to build off a little bit what Todd was saying as well, though, I think it's really important to think about these tools like Senseye and predictive maintenance. They're not just the tools for the maintenance teams. I talked about creating more visibility and curiosity around this. So if you start showing the machine health to the operators, not the maintenance teams as well, that becomes part of their daily routine. It becomes something that they care about, not just a production run. So it's about elevating that same information and making it more broadly accessible and visible. Also helps that journey significantly.
Yeah, you mentioned a really nice phrase there, that it's a tool to help this predictive maintenance journey. I know Natalie loves to use that phrase.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about that. I think there's some common misconceptions that Senseye itself is predictive maintenance, but it's not. Predictive maintenance is a whole process and a whole strategy. Senseye is a tool to help you achieve that, but you have to use it. And you probably have to change some other practices as well in order to actually achieve predictive maintenance. So let's say Senseye tells you about something. Let's say you have potentially 4 months before you need to maintain a piece of equipment. What are you going to do with that information? So That's something that we often help our customers with is like, okay, you got all your data in, but that's just one small part of the puzzle. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
speaking of,
definitely.
oh, go ahead.
No, so to say I agree 100%. It's just like you've got to take that information, and you might have to change your maintenance practices to handle that. You're going to learn probably way sooner that something's going on with your equipment than what you can justify actually doing the work on it yet.
Or you might, like
So
Nick said, you might work with operations to change how you're using the equipment to make it last a little bit longer, or to baby it a little bit so it makes it to the next shutdown, things like that.
How is that affecting kind of the KPIs that people are looking at when they're, investing in this kind of thing?
So the KPIs can be really difficult to calculate, especially when there's so many unknowns. If you're doing predictive maintenance, the thing hasn't failed. So it's hard to anticipate, like in every case, what might have happened if you hadn't done it. But it is something we do work. It's hard, but we work closely with our customers to try and put hard numbers to these things. A lot of times people come up with kind of generic KPIs, and so we try to make them quantifiable.
We talked earlier on about the disconnect between operational KPIs and the financial metrics that the business run against. And I think for most businesses I work with, that connection has to be strengthened over time, because an OEE, a 20% OEE improvement in OEE, or a 20%, 15% reduction in unplanned downtime, what does that really mean, and who really cares about it? But also, I think we should also think about KPIs in terms of making them not just financial, but relevant to the people that need to make decisions. And that doesn't necessarily mean managers. That could be the maintenance teams. That could be the operator. It could just be a health statement or a health score of my machine. And we want to keep it green. And we want to keep it green 90% of the time. So you don't, they all roll up, but it's actually, I talk about buzzwords. Yeah. It's making things simple. How many Big Macs did we save this week? Yeah. Or this month? It sounds stupid. It might be slightly, but it kind of makes it relevant. And I think that's the key for KPIs rather than just pure financial statements.
Yeah, it makes sense to have this kind of tangible thing, because people can't really imagine how much is actually being saved, but if you put it in a tangible, it makes a lot of sense.
You could bonus on Big Macs, yeah.
Exactly. And I guess the other thing that we kind of spoke about is kind of the time. Another tangible KPI that is the time that you'd spend fixing things, because you can kind of quantify how long it is fixing these things.
Mm-hmm. You can fix it during a breakdown, or you can fix it due, scheduled downtime, avoiding overtime.
Yeah.
But I think, Todd, you were using a phrase earlier on called wrench time. How much wrench time has a maintenance person actually got fixing things rather than analyzing data? And I think there's a combination of what I just mentioned and making KPIs really simple, so it gives direction to the people to do something, and then they're not spending time analyzing why they should be doing it. They know what they need to do, and they go off and have the maximum wrench time possible.
Yep. Wrench time repairing or doing preventative maintenance.
Nice. It's a really great point. And I guess I want to circle back to kind of this point of our whole event here is the scaling. Can you guys speak a little bit to the importance of scaling?
I can get started.
All right.
Sorry, Todd.
No, go for it.
So Senseye really shines at scale. And I think one of the beautiful things about Senseye is if I have, say, 10 motors that are roughly the same data coming in, or if I have 100 or even 1,000 motors coming in, it's pretty much the same amount of effort to configure 10 as it is to configure 100 the way the app is set up. So why not get 100 or 1,000 in and give yourself more chance to catch something, if it's all the same to you, to get the data in there. And then another part of Senseye that is often overlooked if you're not onboarding many assets at the same time is the capacity to view your assets in a fleet. So if you have a whole line of assets and they're performing roughly the same thing in the same way, you can look at their data together and see outliers that they may have been onboarded in a stable state, but they may be sitting, if everybody else is sitting here, one might be sitting up here, might be stable, but very different. And you might want to know about that. So some things like that, I know BlueScope use that view a lot in the app. And if you don't scale and you don't have that duplication of asset types, then you don't really get to see it.
Yeah, definitely. Scaling, what helps is that if you're going to go into this predictive maintenance journey on here, a lot of the easiest thing to do is, okay, we're going to pick these few assets and we're going to start monitoring them, all that. But of course, it's going to be successful. But how do you make it successful on everything else and as easy as possible? So going into the journey, thinking very high level, outside of the box, determining how do I set this up so that I can easily bring more and different types of assets on there. Do you have existing condition-based monitoring systems that you're going to use? So how do we access those and make it as easy as possible on there? Or if I'm going to bring in new condition-based monitoring systems, let's do it in such a way that I can just, use all these pieces, the same pieces over and over again. Maybe you use them in a very creative way to get that information. And it's easier and faster to implement the system.
I think definitely when you look at that, Todd, as you mentioned, that repeatability, that's one of the true paths. But that almost, as I mentioned earlier on, you have to start before you're in the implementation. You need to do a bit of work understanding how many of those assets are similar, what are the things I want to measure? Are they consistently measured in the same way? Don't get caught out with different timestamps between different facilities in different locations. Stupid things like that I see and catch companies out time and time again, so they lose the relevance of it. I was really interested in what Natalie was saying as well about being able to classify or group assets together. One of the things I talk about a lot is about the true potential of manufacturing. So it's not about where you're performing. It's actually the difference between your average performance and your lowest, worst performer, and understanding that difference and why that might be. And if you can bring that up, then your whole system improves. So that true potential view, that's a really interesting way, and a nice actually KPI you can then look at the actual knock-on effect in terms of financial performance.
And I think when you go through and you look at KPIs and you figure out what you want to monitor and what you want to track, it will lead you to the conclusion that it's best to scale. Sometimes folks just want to come in and put their most critical, most problematic assets into Senseye, but really, what are you going to get out of that? It may give you something you didn't already know, but you're probably already over monitoring that asset. Why don't you get in whole lines of asset and reduce your planned maintenance and, track things that maybe you haven't tracked before? There's a lot of possibilities when you onboard at scale.
Awesome. So we're about 20 minutes in, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to kind of jump into some questions. So please, if anyone has any questions for our experts here, throw it into the chat. So for first question, curious customers want to start a PDM project with a POC. But from my point of view, Senseye PDM projects don't include a POC phase in the process models. Is this right? How should I encounter the customers in this matter?
So one thing that we are trying to do is kind of change the language a little bit, because you're right, we don't do a necessarily proof of concept all the time, because, well, it works. It's going to work, right? I don't know. I can say that. What we're calling it instead is an initial deployment. So maybe you do an initial deployment of 50 assets, narrow it down to just a handful of asset types. So 50 assets, maybe 3 different types: motors, fans, pumps, something like that. And that will still help you see value because you have repeatability in there. And just try to, make sure you're selecting assets that actually have a chance of giving value in the timeline that you're looking at. Hopefully that answers that question.
Awesome.
I think we also just need to recognise that as a manufacturer, and I have to say neutral in this, yeah. There's skepticism. There's money on the table here. They want the proof is always in the pudding. I don't know if that translates. It goes across the pond to America well, but we said the proof's in the pudding. So yeah, a POC is always perceived to be a lower risk approach to go in to demonstrate the value. What I see going wrong is there is no plan to scale thereafter. So we should always go into a proof of concept with, if we can demonstrate success, this is the plan on day 2, or actually day 1 after the end of the POC, where we start to deploy more broadly. And that's when we talk about scale, that's when the value increases for the customer. They've proven it, they're comfortable with it, the skepticism, yeah, and we've always done it this way, has gone out the window because they've seen it as the new way, a better way, and they move forward.
I think one of the key words you used in there, Nick, was if we achieve success. So you have to decide to define quantifiably what is success and make sure it's actually an attainable thing. You could say we want to have like 50 hours of downtime avoided on these 4 assets over the next month. Like, how often do they actually fail? Is it possible? Right? So you have to make sure you're defining those, whether you call it a proof of concept or an initial deployment. I would consider them to be really the same thing. The most important thing from my perspective is that, like Nick said, you're defining success, having a plan, but also using the app to its full capacity and not limiting it in this initial deployment. So limiting it might mean, not using the co-pilot, or it might mean not actually sending in live data and trying to use, historic data, which is it's just not how the app works.
How do you talk to customers who are kind of adverse to implementing this new technology? What kind of recommendations would you have when you walk into these who are, these old school who are like, no, thank you, I don't want to do an extra step?
Well, in the case of ours, we did do a proof of concept, and we were able to demonstrate with that proof of concept that the technology was 100% effective, catching the conditions that we initially wanted to catch with it. So going from there, was like, okay, hey, we just showed it. That was enough to show, management that the system was worked, successful and accurate. We scaled it up immediately, and the fact that we was actually able to get ROI within a month, of on there, got most of the hardcore. Then some of the other ones that were a little more hesitant was, you just ignored us, and here you go, as you can imagine. Unfortunately, you want to try to avoid that situation as much as possible, but
I think the important thing is, like Todd is saying, is the internal messaging within the users and the champions of Senseye. Capture those successes, document them, spread the messaging internally, like, hey, this thing is saving us work, it's preventing downtime avoided, and whatever else your KPIs are, and making sure that information is being shared internally.
Yeah, definitely. Just, since I started it 7 years ago, there's 7 years of lessons learned that you can rely on to help you with this journey and getting going with it. And it's all good, valuable information and proven.
I think just also listening. If people are objecting and creating these barriers, I think it's also important to understand why they're objecting, because I don't want to do it that way. There's a reason why. I think it can be ranging from, lack of knowledge of what benefits the tools could actually give them, the process could give them. It could be actually they feel they need to be in job protection mode. This is a threat. So understanding those objections, obviously you can address that on a one-to-one. But another important thing is these same resistance points will actually be quietly elsewhere. So taking those things, and when I was talking about earlier on, it's not just about the KPI, it's about actually the emotional connection. Why does this make my life better? Not just about it improves unplanned downtime, for example. That allows you to bring those into your communication as well and address it more broadly. At some point, you can drag the horse to water, but you can't always necessarily make it drink. And change happens and you have to progress. So, I think there's a lot you can do. There's a lot of things around the KPIs and just subtle messaging, addressing the concerns. But at some point, these are also businesses. Yeah, we all work for a business. So we have to go forward and make the improvements we talk about.
Yeah, I know in our conversations, prepping for this, we mentioned something about the shift from firefighting to the preventing, and kind of that view of not being able to, you look like a hero when you, put out the fires. Doesn't really matter if you might have started it in the background, but if you put it out and you save it, then it tends to be kind of that. So how do you kind of encourage that shift over?
Safety. Sorry, Nick, but safety, the safety of your own maintenance techs. As maybe you're aware of, if you're trying to work on repair something during a breakdown during production, there's always this push to get done as quickly as possible and get production going, and that's really where a lot of your accidents can happen. By getting that into a more controlled environment, the safety of your techs, and they can see that they're more prepped and they're going to be working in a much safer environment, is a good point.
Yeah. Liz, you made me smile because I used the phrase of everybody loves to be the hero. Everybody loves to be the Red Adair putting out the fires, but it's only at some point you realise that Red Adair was also the arsonist. So exactly to the point you were talking about, I think the safety thing is a lot of this is about job satisfaction as well. Yeah, being actually proactive means that you're not under the pressure. You feel that you're actually making a difference rather than just trying to maintain the status quo that keeps crumbling around you. And I think that is really, I've talked about this recently in some other podcasts, really, really important for shop floor morale. And these tools really help, make people feel like they're adding value, not just trying to keep the lights on. So I think that's, to me, one of the most beneficial things that we can do.
It's a really good point. It's nice to kind of have that aspect of it. No one likes to have to work extra weekends because there's these unplanned downtimes. They want to spend time with family and friends and do their own thing. So that makes a lot of sense. We are just on time. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And we'll pass it back off over to Niall.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.